Hi guys, welcome back to What Is This Weapon? I'm Jonathan, and we have another suspicious looking, fairly anonymous actually, box on the table. Quite small, as you can see. It has got a critical piece of information on the lid, which we'll come to in a moment. Otherwise, nothing to write home about. This isn't What Is This Wooden Box? So let's get it opened up. And let me just show you the Cased guns are always nice, so I just want to show you the inside of this before I pull out the pistol. We can say it's a pistol by this point. And it's in a nice lined felt box, rather than the usual sort of partitions for things like bullets, powder flasks, that kind of thing. We have it's still a wooden construct, as it were, lined in felt. And there are some interesting items on here that are the feed mechanism, feed device for this firearm. So before I preempt myself too much, let's just gently pull out the pistol. I'll set the box to one side. I'll just close the lid so it's not supporting on its own hinges. It's not a good idea with antique stuff. So here is the pistol in question. This is the Testa pistol, T-E-S-T-A, not E-R. Always helpful for curatorial staff when the key information is written on the gun. Keeps research to a minimum. So there's a flat on top of the barrel. That's not unusual, but as you'll see in just a second, the barrels are pretty unusual. But I just wanted to show you that because it's Giuseppe Testa. He was, Italian-American. He's working in New York at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. As this tells us, in fact, Giuseppe Testa, New York, patent August the 13th, 1917, patent number 185841. Now that's his second patent. We'll get into the patents in a moment and we'll show you them on screen. First of all, though, let's just say this is amazing. This is I don't know whether to call it steampunk or whether it's more a sort of Star Wars look to it, but it's pretty cool. I think it has to be said. A bit of an oddball design, needless to say. And I talked about the barrels just now. Well, there are 10 of them. 10-barrel pistol. You can see them there in a cluster. But this Blade Runner-esque bolt action, that's pretty curious. So is it a bolt action 10-barreled break barrel pistol? This is getting pretty confusing already. I think we can grasp the function of the hammers. You cock those back, and sure enough, there are, if we can see that on camera, but there are some fairly stout firing pins at the front. So if we just look at the action with the hammers, it's much like a shotgun, hammer gun with external hammers. That's not too confusing. What is confusing, I think, is, well, first of all, that bolt, as I mentioned, it's actually more simple than it looks. Some of you have probably already figured it out. And then how on earth we get our 10 shots into that breech and fire them with just one firing pin. How does one firing pin fire all 10 shots? Well, it's quite ingenious and at the same time a bit clunky. So just to deal with the bolt action first, it's not obviously a bolt action. It's not involved in feeding. What it is, and you might be able to see this, I'll hold this up for the camera there. When I push this forward, don't know if you can see, there is a bolt sliding forward and locking in to the barrel cluster. So this is your lockup. And then we flick it up and it is sprung. So it immediately comes to the rear as you flip up this latch. I'll show you that from a different angle. So push forward against spring pressure and press down to lock. Just like a sort of Lee Enfield bolt action in that respect, but it's not picking up a cartridge and feeding it. All it's doing is introducing the bolt from the action into the barrel cluster and locking this up nice and solid. So that's the reload, or at least the opening of the gun. Flick it up. It does tend to, the extractor, you've probably seen the multiple round extractor that was on the face of the breech there, or in front of the face of the breech. That does tend to get snagged on the locking bolt. So we do have to make sure manually that this is all the way to the rear. Now that might be to do with age. I suspect it might be a slight design flaw. But hey, if you positively control the bolt thing, latch, to the rear when you open it, then it's always going to open up. And that will always pop out your extractor, just like a shotgun. You can also see a massive, great locking lug under the barrels there. That's locking into this big hole down here. So all very positive. If that seems excessive for what is, well, spoiler alert, a .22 caliber pistol, you might have guessed that from how small these bores are. It was either going to be .22 or .25, I think. If you think that's excessive, bear in mind this is 10 of those going off at once, so that's still a fair old weight of lead with a certain amount of powder charge behind it. We'll find out how much in a moment, or in theory. Now, before we go back to the breech mechanism and the feed device and why there's a big gap, have a think why that might be. We'll come to it in a moment. Before we come back to that, I just want to talk briefly about the overall design. Obviously, the barrel cluster is pretty unusual with that semi-trapezoidal shape, I think you might say. Don't know how to describe that really. It's unique. I haven't seen anything like that. So those are, I believe, individual barrels, probably brazed onto a central block. Quite an unusual design, unusual construction. On top of that, we have sights. So we've got a great big blade front sight there, and a pretty tiny rear notch. So it's not going to be super quick to acquire them, but they are there, and not bad for the time, you know, bearing in mind this is about, well, if the inscription is to be believed, 1917, 18, that sort of time, maybe as late as 1920. This is a date limit. It obviously isn't the date of the gun. Otherwise, we've got this pseudo shotgun action with the unusual locking lever. We have a spurred trigger guard, which is a bit like a target pistol system for steadying your aim. So you use your middle finger to in theory, steady your aim. In reality, I'm a little skeptical, but quite common on late 19th, early 20th century revolvers and single-shot target pistols. Nicely made walnut grip panels on the steel frame. They go straight onto the steel frame, just like a revolver in that respect. A solid frame with grip panels screwed on either side. Nicely checkered, selected walnut by the look of it. In beautiful condition. This whole pistol is in amazing condition. Really nice, deep, shiny blue. The hammers, I don't know if you can see that on camera, but the hammers are actually fire or niter blued. So they are a much brighter actual blue color. If I can get them to catch the light properly, they should look that way to you as well. And then the rest of the blued finish is standard, highly, highly polished, high quality bluing. Very different from modern cold bluing. And the other bit of walnut on here is this tiny little fore end, which is part of the break barrel mechanism. Those of you who've used conventional shotguns will be very familiar with that. And normally it's there to give the offhand something to grasp. Doesn't really apply here. Unless the intention is to go for a very, very early two-handed grip. But I think it's more there for stylistic reasons. The checkering is probably more decorative. Who knows? In any case, it's tiny. Normally, it would be on a much bigger gun. Great big nickeled, I believe, trigger. I say great big because it's on a massive pivoting block under the action. Trigger blade itself isn't massive, but pretty substantial component nonetheless. But enough gushing over this thing. Let me grab the critical missing bit of kit from the kit. So, here it is. Fascinating. It is actually, let me show you, if I can, the two components. So it's a brass plate perforated with 11 holes. Yes, 11 holes. 10 for the rounds and 1 for the locking bolt. So the locking bolt is passing through this plate and then into the barrel assembly. And I don't know if you can see, separate this one for you. Yeah, you will be able to see now. 2 separate components. So it's a brass plate, and this side is shaped for the rims of cartridges. And that rests inside a copper back plate. It's getting pretty complicated, isn't it? And this plate holds, they are fired, but it holds 2 percussion caps. So we've got 2 firing pins hitting 2 percussion caps and doing something. So ordinary percussion caps, and instead of sitting over a conventional nipple with the touch hole or the vent running through the middle of that, instead of that we have little steel pins that are solid. So the flame is hitting the pins, and instead of going through like a nipple, it's going around. And then we have 5 touch holes of a sort. So those lines running to each of the 5 holes in this plate, each one of those is acting like a touch hole, redirecting that percussion blast of flame down a flame channel and into something else. So it's getting even more complicated, but hopefully this will click when I show you the final ingredient in this crazy, crazy system. So as if that wasn't complicated enough, we have a final step in the process, which is built into the cartridges. So if I take one out, this is an empty cartridge case, it is in fact drilled on both sides, absolutely tiny pinhole drilled near the rim on 2 sides. And I think that's drilled on 2 sides because you've got to line it up with these flame paths. Now I don't know what would happen if you didn't line it up. So if you put this in, imagine this was loaded, and you managed to line it up exactly in the wrong orientation, so the 2 holes either side here instead of one of them in line with the vent, it's quite possible there'd be enough force and heat going around the head of the cartridge to still fire it off. That might be why there are 2. That it's the sort of redundancy built into the system, in that there's enough for gap. They are quite wobbly. He could have made these tighter in here. So my speculation is that it's intended to always go off without having to laboriously align each cartridge and then keep it lined up as you insert it into the breech. That just seems like insanity to me. So I have to assume that it all worked regardless of orientation. And that's the final bit of the system. So we've got a hammer hitting a firing pin, which protrudes forwards, hits a percussion cap, which then directs its flame over the steel pin and 5 ways to the 5 winds, and then that flashes through the tiny hole in the cartridge case to fire the cartridge. And I should briefly cover the fact that if you only cock one hammer, only the one side will go. So only 5 shots will go at once. If I only cock the one hammer, bang. If I cock both hammers and pull the trigger, they both go. There's your all 10 shots, giving you a sort of shotgun in your hand effect. But if you're not feeling very confident and you want to keep a shot of 5 rounds in reserve, then you would only cock one of them. Now the implication of that is you're having to carry this thing around. Well, it's not just the implication of that. The implication of this having no safety catch and the fact that you want to be able to select which side to fire potentially means you're going to be carrying this with the hammers down. So, like a single action revolver, you're going to have to cock one or both to get 5 or 10 shots. Okay, so putting all of this together with our vastly complicated feed device, once you've got that together, your sandwich of death is what I'm going to dub this. We hit this little latch underneath, which I didn't mention before. This is to stop it accidentally coming open on your coat or belt or whatever. It doesn't work very well. It's quite easy to overcome, but in theory you'd have to press that catch to open the latch. Pull that to the rear and break it open. So far, so what you've seen. And then we take these are solid brass inert cartridges, and we can offer that up. That goes home into the breech and gives you, it's a bit like some of the cartridge conversion revolvers of the early 1870s, where you had to undo the cylinder. There's a solid back to the cylinder with firing pins in it. You insert all of your cartridges, stick the back on the cylinder, then load the cylinder into the gun, that kind of thing. It's that level of having to mess about. But once you have it loaded, snap shut, safety bolt is home. So this is how it would look with that funky copper edge of our feed device showing all the way around. I mean, it's a very clear loaded chamber indicator, I suppose, but then you don't know how many of those have been fired. If you just encounter this as is, you wouldn't know without opening it up. And even if you do open it up, it doesn't really help, because you can't see whether any of those have been fired either until you then remove your feed device and you see that a number of them are missing. Well, in theory, it should be all one half or the other, or both, that are all missing their bullets. So, very, very complicated, but we love complicated here at the Royal Armouries. So, I mentioned patents. This is to Giuseppe Testa's 1917 patent, and that, well, it embodies a number of claims, but the big change in the design, which is what we're interested in, is to this system, this sandwich system of loading. Prior to this, his original 1899 patent, which is substantially the same as this, other than the way the locking bolt works, which we can show you. I can show you the picture from the patent of that. It's essentially a sort of third hammer with a rod attached to it that pivots, and so you draw back your third hammer in order to unlock the system. This seems like an improvement, so that's a big difference. And then in the feed side of things, or the ignition side of things, his original design, which we can't show you in the flesh, but is in the 1899 patent, is basically, it's kind of what you'd expect if you're trying to invent a pistol that fires all 10 shots at once. Still a sort of a sandwich, but you have a sliding breech block and then another block with a load of firing pins in it. And so you're converting the strike of the hammer, you're spreading that impact force over a big sort of anvil and trying to fire off all 10 percussion caps at once. Not ideal. You can well imagine that some of those wouldn't go off because the pressure wouldn't be even enough, or if you managed to equalize the pressure, that none of them would go off. Unclear how unsuccessful or otherwise that was, except that he threw that aspect of the design in the bin and went for this instead. Now, something I haven't covered, and the ammunition buffs amongst you will be getting annoyed with me by this point, because I've steadfastly refused to tell you what this cartridge actually is. So I mentioned that it was 22 caliber, or 22 if you prefer. As you can probably tell from the case length, it is not 22 rimfire. 22 rimfire, 22 LR, 22 long rifle being the world's most common rimfire caliber, still in use today, very commonly. And at one time, rimfire was much more common, lots of different calibers. Anyway, so this is not 22 LR, this is 22 WRF, or 22 Winchester rimfire. So this was a cartridge type invented in 1890 for the Winchester slide action rifle. So 9 years before Testa patented the first version of this. The ammunition shows up in the patent significantly, I think, because he has to show how the system's going to work. And so it's a modified form of the cartridge. You'd have to essentially load your own or modify your own ammunition. It's a little bit dicey. Don't fancy drilling into a live round, because reloading rimfire is a bit of a challenge. The percussion compound, the shock-sensitive material that sets the round off, is around the rim. So whereas you can reload an empty centerfire case by replacing the primer. Reloading rimfire is something of a challenge. So in theory, you'd be there with a tiny little hand drill, drilling your little fire holes into your otherwise rimfire ammunition. Why he went with this and didn't come up with a system that would crush the rims, I don't know. It seems a little bizarre to not come up with some sort of multiple anvil system that would just crush all the rims. I would have thought that his original 1899 design with the sort of great big single anvil could have been adapted to work with rimfire. It wasn't. So that's what the round is. It's fascinating that presumably he has supplied these solid drill rounds with this, or what we call drill rounds. Not seen that before. It's great because we haven't got a handy example of 22 Winchester rimfire to show you, so it means I can show you an example of a complete cartridge, albeit that should be a separate bullet, obviously. And we're fortunate that the kit also comes with these fired cases with the drilled vent holes. Now, the question we always ask ourselves with these oddball firearms is why? Who would buy this? What was Tester marketing it as? I haven't seen any evidence of what he thought it would be best used for, but I think given that you can fire either 5 or 10 .22 caliber, relatively powerful, but very small bore .22 caliber rounds, it's got to be self-defense, I think. So you get 5 and 5 or 10 in one go, and then a club. It's not a great club, but I think it has to be for self-defense purposes. And of course, just the good old-fashioned novelty value for someone with a bit of money and time on their hands to buy the latest technology and show it off to their friends and have a shot with it down the range. You can imagine the uproar at the local range when you show up and blast 10 rounds at once out of a handgun. Yeah, the recoil is going to be significant. The flash, the noise, the chaps around you are going to be impressed. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as any kind of actual self-defense pistol, but it would do the job in a pinch. In case you're wondering, yes, logically the two sides are slightly offset. So if you fire all 10, the two in the middle are going to be dead center. Those around will give you more chance of hitting, more chance of injuring someone seriously if you do hit them. The usual logic of a shotgun or a volley gun. If you only fire one side, you've got a somewhat enhanced potential for missing, I would say, given short weapon, short sight radius, lots of potential movement. Tiny amount of movement down here translates to yards of movement down range effectively. Yeah, not amazing. Thanks so much for watching, guys. We really appreciate that. If you'd like to come and visit us at one of our 3 sites, please do. We always appreciate physical visitors as well as digital. And you can check out our various social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Also, keep an eye on our website, and the socials as well, because we have a joust coming up, one of our big events that we're known for here at the Armouries. They're always a good time. Either way, however you engage with us, we'd like to see you again next time.